are monthly events. These are monthly events that the Juneau Commission on Sustainability has been putting on, well, monthly for about the last year. Before that, they'd been a little more irregularly scheduled. We talk about a variety of topics related to sustainability in Juneau. Some of them have been, we have talked about composting, we've talked about cruise ships, we've talked about garbage bears, and tonight's topic is food waste, which seemed like a relevant topic to talk about at the holidays. We just got through Thanksgiving, we have Christmas coming up. This is also a time of year when a lot of people are thinking about annual charitable donations and that sort of thing. We decided to try and go with an all virtual format for the first time tonight. We normally have these events in person, but there is a bit of a crunch on venues in Juneau right now. The Mendenhall Library that we frequently use has been turned into a FEMA disaster response center. So we have a little bit of a smaller group with the virtual only. I get it. People all like in-person events. So I'd invite all of you to be a little bit more participatory. You don't have to just sit there and let us talk at you. We'd love to hear ideas and thoughts people have. JCOS, the body that organizes these events, we are an advisory body to the Assembly. We are appointed by the CBJ Assembly. And so in addition to hosting these events to try and get word out to the public, we also spend a lot of our time, writing memos to the Assembly on things the city should be doing related to sustainability. So we love to hear feedback and input from the public as we do these kind of events. So with that as our introduction of this series, tonight's topic, as I said, is food waste. Unfortunately, we had two of our other panelists cancel on us within the last couple of weeks here. So we are down to just Dan Parks coming to us from the food bank. We had hoped to have some local restaurants and other players in this space come in to talk about how they fit in. But I guess it's a little bit of a chaotic time for people in Juneau. So welcome, Dan. Thank you for carving time out of your evening to come talk to us. Do you have anything that you would like to give as far as an introduction to your organization?
Sure. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, everybody, for being here. And thanks a lot for having me. It's a great pleasure and honor of mine to be able to speak to you. So I really appreciate the opportunity. I am, as Nick said, I'm with the Southeast Alaska Food Bank. I'm the general manager here, and I've been here for a relatively short time. I started in April of this year. So I am by no means myself an expert on food waste, but I do hope to be able to offer you all some perspective and some insight into what we're doing and how what we're working on is related to food waste in Juneau. I haven't given a ton of thought to recommendations for the city or the council, but I'm hoping that through speaking with you all tonight, I will learn at least as much, if not much more, from you than I will be able to share with you.
Well, if we'd had our chef guest come on to talk about what to do with those Thanksgiving leftovers, then maybe we could have offered that. But so just to get us started, when we talked on the phone setting up for this event, we touched a little bit on kind of the food bank, where the food comes from and where it goes. Could you summarize that for the guests tonight in terms of just like what kind of volumes of food are we talking about and what your major contributors are?
Yeah, I actually prepared a PowerPoint that I
Oh,
can go
fantastic.
through, and that'll cover a lot of those things as well as some others. And then I'm happy to take questions, or we can talk about whatever comes up. But yeah, I'll just share my screen and go through what I've prepared. Hopefully that'll contextualize some of what I'd like to talk about. And then, yeah, we'll take questions and go from there.
Perfect.
I have so many windows open here. Let me figure out which one. Okay. Are you guys seeing this PowerPoint?
Yep. I'm
Okay.
seeing the Southeast Alaska Food Bank and food waste title slide.
Okay, excellent. Yes, so once again, I'm with the Southeast Alaska Food Bank. We are a relatively small operation in the context of food banking at large, but we are by far and away the biggest food bank in the region, being the only real food bank in Southeast Alaska. And we are probably the third or fourth largest food banking organization in the state, based solely on what I've been told by the Food Bank of Alaska, which is the big one in Anchorage. And we service the entire Southeast region, but only on a fairly limited scale, being that transportation of goods between Seattle and Juneau is very expensive. Between Anchorage and Juneau is very expensive and complicated. And then getting from Juneau to the other communities in our region is also pretty complicated. So we do have members in, we've got a couple in Haines, Petersburg, Cake. We've had members in Pelican before. Some of them we're working on renewing, and some of them are in development. But right now we have approximately 30 members, with a couple that we're still developing. And the majority of those are in Juneau, but we are throughout Southeast. Obviously, I'm in Juneau, and our headquarters is here. Our main operation is here. When I was thinking about what to talk to you all about tonight, I thought, in the context of food waste, it would be best to kind of highlight some of our programs and how our organization operates and how that's related to food waste. So first off, some of our programs that are directly relevant to the concept of food waste are our big ones. Our current program, our grocery rescue, is the biggest and most relevant. Grocery rescue is the title that we give to our program that involves going to all of the various grocery stores and distributors in Juneau and picking up anything that would otherwise be waste. Every day, Monday through Thursday, we have a member of our staff, a guy named Craig. He gets here at 8 a.m. or a little before every day, loads up our van, and then he goes to Foodland, Safeway, Super Bear, Costco, and Fred Meyer every morning, and picks up anything that they have that they are going to discard. And then once per week, not every day, he'll also go to, he usually goes to Breezen pretty much every day as well. And then he'll also go to other distributors in town like Coke, Northern Sales, a couple of other places, and does that on kind of a rotating weekly basis. And that is where we source the vast majority of the food that we redistribute. Grocery rescue is a big thing for food banking in general. Larger food banks in larger population centers have entire fleets of drivers. I think the Food Bank of Alaska sends out something like a dozen vans a day, and that includes operations down in the Kenai too and all around the area. So grocery rescue is a big thing. Food banks in general do a lot of work with grocery rescue. Some of them call it different things, but that is kind of our flagship program. And you'll see why as I get into some of these later slides that have some statistics and data about what grocery rescue means and so on and so forth. Some of our other programs are, we operate a storefront. The storefront is what you also might think of as our flagship program. Out here behind me, we've got basically a mini grocery store. Everything that comes in from grocery rescue, everything that comes in through private donations gets a representation in our storefront. And it kind of operates like a convenience store or a small grocery store where people that are accompanied by a member agency or a representative of a member agency can come into the store and shop. We've got shopping carts. And then instead of charging cash, we charge weight. So as you'll see also going forward through some of these other slides, everything that we do here is food in, food out in terms of pounds. And that's where we do most of our reporting. That's how we kind of assess our performance from year to year and so on and so forth. So everybody that comes in through the store will weigh out at the end, and then we'll tally all those weights and compare them against food in, etc. The other thing that a lot of people know us for, and something that we're often mistaken for, I suppose, is our public pantry. And public pantry is the time that we open our doors to anyone. Most of the time we are open for member services, but when we host our public pantry, we're available to distribute food to any comers, basically no questions asked, and we like it that way. Our public pantry here at the food bank is every Thursday from 3 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. And like I say, all comers will walk away with something. Usually it's somewhere between 20 to 30 pounds of food. It varies from week to week, and it depends on what's on hand, what's available, what else we've done that week. And also it's very seasonally dependent. It changes wildly from week to week, but any given week, public pantry, we expect to serve somewhere between 100 and 150 families, and that usually translates to 300 to 400 people, give or take. The reason I say we're often mistaken for a public pantry is because we're a food bank first. A food bank is different than a public pantry or a food pantry, and that's a common misconception in food banking. So our core mission is to serve as a community bridge between those who don't have access and those that want to help. And mostly what we're trying to do is provide access to all of this food to other public pantries or other agencies. So a lot of people think that our public pantry is the main thing we do, when really it's only a small fraction of what we do. Mostly what we're spending our time and resources and energy on is supplying food to other public pantries or other agencies and organizations that are providing food security work in our communities. That said, public pantry is still a really, really important part of what we do. It's probably the most rewarding part of my work, and it's where we get to interact face to face with the people that really benefit from our services, versus most of the time we're interacting with people that are also doing this work, and both have their value, of course, but the really rewarding thing is to put a bunch of groceries in somebody's hand, you know. Then, like I said, our storefront is open for member services, as well as our warehouse is open for member services. like I say, we have 30 some odd members and they all look a little bit different. So each member has their own protocols, their own needs, their own demands, and we try to meet them where they're at. So, for example, one of our biggest members is the Glory Hall. They send a representative over once or twice a week, and we load them up with anything they can cook, anything they can distribute, whatever it might be. It tends to be 1,000 to 1,500 pounds of food a week. And like I say, they take that back. They've got their nice kitchen over there and they prepare it all and they serve, 60 to 100 meals a couple times a day. And they get a lot of that food from us. Again, like everything we do, it's dependent on what we have, what comes in from grocery rescue, what we've purchased, what's on hand, but we provide a lot of food to them. And then we also have members like Jamie's a big member, Juneau Alliance for Mental Health, and they come in and they have a very different model where they'll bring in residential clients or they'll bring in outpatient clients, and those clients will do their own personal shopping in our storefront for the week or for, to supplement whatever income they may have so that they can go home and prepare meals. And then kind of everything in between, as well as there's, I think, 8 public pantries currently operating in Juneau. And those agencies come in and they get food from us so that they can go back and stock their shelves so that when they open their doors to the public, they have something to distribute to them. So member services is a very broad swath. It's a big brush to paint with because every member looks a little bit differently, but that is really the core of what we do at the food bank. And then we have a greenhouse and a garden, and we grow some of our own food. It hasn't been extremely productive, but we're looking to expand that in the coming year. I meant to pull some figures on how much food we got out of the greenhouse this year, but I didn't get to it. I could probably dig those up later. And then we have some new programs under development. We're rolling out the emergency food assistance program starting, I think, next month, hopefully. And that is a federally funded USDA farm subsidy program. So a lot of food that gets grown, you all probably know a little bit about food surplus and USDA, but a lot of food that gets grown, harvested, manufactured, what have you, doesn't end up getting sold to retailers and wholesalers and stuff. And so the USDA buys up a bunch of it and then distributes it out in various ways. One of those ways is TFAP, the Emergency Food Assistance Program, and we are going to start utilizing that here soon. There's several other organizations that use TFAP in Alaska and some in Juneau already, including the Glory Hall and Salvation Army. And there's a couple different ways that TFAP can work, but for us, it's going to be an additional distribution that will be similar to our public pantry, but kind of in addition to or on top of. And then we're working with the Juneau Community Foundation and the Zach Gordon Youth Center to roll out some backpack programs that'll help kids, at-risk youth or various young people that use the Zach Gordon services or that are just school age to be able to take some food home over like holiday breaks, long weekends, things like that when they don't have access to school lunches. And then we're also developing some disaster relief food storage so that we'll have things on hand that we can hopefully quickly move in the event of things like landslides and floods, which we all know are more common in this area, especially these days. So moving on, this is just a really broad overview of the last couple of fiscal years here at the Southeast Alaska Food Bank. And it just looks like a bunch of numbers, but the top row is food in, the middle row is food out, and then the last row is waste. Excuse me. So I'll get more into kind of what these numbers mean as we go on, but you'll see that the big majority of the food that we bring in comes from stores, donations, and then a smaller margin of that comes in through food purchasing. A lot of the things that we like to have on hand, a lot of the things that we like to keep in stock, and the high demand items don't come into us reliably enough through donations and through grocery rescue, so we end up purchasing them. We are an affiliate member of Feeding America, and we're a partner agency of Food Bank of Alaska. So we have access to bulk food purchasing programs through that avenue that isn't necessarily available to grocery wholesalers and stuff like that, which will enable us to buy this stuff in greater numbers going forward. So we're hoping that in the coming years, food purchasing will go up to meet rising demand and to kind of stabilize and level out some of the needs that we have, some of the gaps that we can fill that don't come in through donations and things like that. Then you'll see that food out is again, vast majority is going to members, and then another a larger percentage than like the food purchase versus donation, but still quite a bit going out during our pantries. You'll see that the numbers from fiscal year 23 to fiscal year 24 dropped, which is the first time that that has happened maybe ever in food bank history. But the reason that there's a big discrepancy between those numbers is we reduced from fiscal year 23 to 24 dramatically the amount of unhealthy snack foods and sugary beverages and things like that. So we were taking in basically anything we could get in 23, and then in 24 we decided we weren't going to take like Coca-Cola anymore, and we weren't going to do a lot of chips and not as much donuts and stuff like that. So we actually started refusing some donations on things that we felt weren't necessarily in line with our mission of providing nutritious meals. That said, our numbers are still pretty comparable from year to year, even though we were accepting less donations and demand is rising. And then our waste. So we take in a lot of food. We take in almost anything we can get, but unfortunately, we can't always get it all back out. A lot of times we'll take in food that is already past the point of being safe for human consumption by the time it even gets here. And then a lot of things after they are here for a couple of days, we decide pull the plug, get rid of them. And then some of it just doesn't move. Some of it people just don't take. We get a lot of the same things week after week, and believe it or not, some people just don't want them anymore. So a lot of the stuff that we end up composting is the same French bread that becomes like a baseball bat after a couple of days or whatever. But we have to be very careful with our relationships with our donors and with the supermarkets and things that are providing us this food. And a lot of times it's better for us to take it and compost it than for them to throw it in their trash compactor or whatever. So some of our waste happens from things like that. A lot of it ends up being spillage or damaged packaging that we can't put out on the shelf. Once something is unsealed, if it's like a, like a commercially produced sealed product and it becomes open in transit or between getting from the store to us, we can't distribute that. We have our own set of guidelines that we follow from the USDA, which aren't quite as rigid as the guidelines that some of the grocery stores use, but still there are things that we get in that we can't use. So we still generate quite a bit of food waste, but if you compare the numbers from food in to waste, everything in the difference is food that would be waste that ends up getting repurposed. We also give a lot of food to chickens and some pigs. Anything that is going to the compost that somebody can come and pick up to feed to their chickens or to their pigs, we try to do that. If any of you know any pig farmers, I'm looking to cultivate relationships with pig farmers. I don't think there's a lot in Juneau, but I do have one family that comes and picks up some stuff for their pigs. It's just one small thing that we can do to try to, you know, make less waste in the landfill. And we try to recycle a lot. Recycling is something that our numbers are going up this year, and a lot of it just has to do with manpower, you know, people being available to take the time to actually take the food out of the packaging and then send the packaging to the recycling facility. We go to recycling every day that we go out for grocery rescue, and we do our composting with Juneau Compost. And those are, I mean, they kind of feel like small things, but compared to sending all that stuff to the landfill, we think is a big win. So overall, yeah, less than 10% of what we bring in ends up being waste versus, you know, if we weren't doing it at all, then we'd be talking about 100% of that going to waste. Anyway, we can come back to this later if you have more questions about it. Food sourcing. This really doesn't paint a very thorough picture. Excuse me, but for what it's worth, the vast majority of the food that we bring in comes from grocery rescue. And we would love it if that number was even higher. Grocery rescue is a full-time job. It, you know, takes Craig and 4 or 5 volunteers a week, their whole week, to go out and do this, and it brings in a lot of food. But that said, there's still a lot of waste going out through grocery stores. And like I say, some of the stuff that they bring back is stuff that we can't use. Donations, food drives, and purchased food looks small in comparison, but really, if you add those 3 together and stack them up, then that's a more accurate picture of food that's being donated to us, because a pretty wide majority of the food that we purchase is purchased with donated funds. So everything that comes in through donations, everything that comes in through food drives, everything that comes in through purchased food, unless it's purchased through a grant, which isn't all that common for us at this point, although it is something that we're working on. A lot of that food is all donated. And then the stuff that comes in through grocery rescue is donation too, really, just of a different form. And then in the other category, mostly what we have coming in that way is pet food, and mostly that's coming in through Grateful Dogs. George Utermole is a great partner, and we work with him. We get a lot of pet food in through donations, and we work with George to distribute that throughout town. So, side note, we do pet food too. Public pantry is where we distribute a lot of our pet food, and honestly, I think it's a big reason why a lot of people come down here for our pantry, is because they can get some food. We are very conscientious about making sure that somebody's not prioritizing getting food for their pet over them. So we give pet food in addition to anything that we might give otherwise. And that's thanks to Grateful Dogs. And also under other is we have a relationship with the organization C Share. C Share is a really great organization that takes all of the discard and illegally harvested fish that would get wasted, a lot of it coming straight out of our waters here. They take that and then they process it and donate it to food banks like ours. Shifting gears here a little bit, I want to talk about the USDA guidelines that we use. And this is kind of one of those things where I can offer some recommendations to people that are listening, or to the people that you know, is at the food bank and at food banks in general, we generally follow USDA guidelines on food storage, expiration dates, and this is a small selection of the complete list of USDA guidelines. But as you can see, shelf storage on a lot of canned goods can be much longer than people might think. And when it says storage on shelf in the second column, it's talking about beyond the date on the package. So if I get a can of, I don't know, corn that comes in and it says March 2021, we don't throw that away. We can still find a home and a use for that. It depends on the product. A lot of stuff has different guidelines. And like I say, we've got a much more thorough list that we reference. But for kind of painting the picture here, there's a lot of stuff that people might throw out that is actually still good. The next slide coming up, we'll talk about kind of why that is, but basically food can be ruined by a couple of different types of bacteria, and they're not all pathogenic. Some of them don't actually make you sick, but they just make the food not good. And manufacturers essentially use that information to decide what the best by date on a product is. And the best by date does not generally reflect when that product's going to make you sick. There are exceptions, like dented or opened cans, if they're showing sign of spoilage, are no good. And we do have to throw that out. And that's where some of our waste comes from. And we do get a lot of products in, like, for example, I keep this on my desk, a can of escargot from 2010 that we got in recently during a food drive. This I can't use, but it's kind of an interesting artifact. And we do get some stuff like this, but this is the minority of what we see. Almost everything that we get is useful to us. And as long as we can check it, and as long as the people that we're distributing to know that if they open it and it smells good and it looks good and it doesn't show any signs of spoilage, it's probably okay, especially if you're going to cook it within reason, of course. If I see something that comes in from before 2020, odds are we're probably going to have to get rid of it. But there are exceptions to that. So one of the things that I just really want to get across here today is that if you have old food in your pantry and you're not sure, there's a pretty good chance that we might be able to use it. And then this is kind of what I was talking about as for why. And if you go to the USDA.gov, it's the Food Safety Inspection Services, is FSIS. If you go to their website, there's a really long and comprehensive explanation of all this stuff. This is just kind of a small sampling of what's on there. But if you look at this bottom, what date labeling phrase does FSIS recommend? It says the USDA estimates that 30% of the food supply is lost or wasted at the retail and consumer levels, which is an astonishing number. 30% is lost or wasted, because a lot of people just don't know this, that just because it says best by or sell by, that doesn't necessarily mean throw it away on that day. And when I talk about recommendations I can give is donate that stuff or just eat it. It's probably fine. It's usually fine. So I recommend that you go to this page, read up about food safety and why some of this stuff is good or not good. And then you can print out their list of guidelines and tack it up in your pantry, and then you'll know. But if you're not sure or you're hesitant, bring it down to us. We'll sort it. If it's in a can and it's too old for people, we'll try and feed it to some pigs or some chickens, or compost it. So yeah, that's something that I really wish people were more aware of. But moving on. The last thing I wanted to talk about is just some facts and figures. We use this organization called Refed. The link or the URL is on the bottom of this slide, and I'll show you some data from them, but it's a really great tool and has a lot of really interesting information. They have really thorough methodology, and you can read all about it on their website. And then they just amalgamate data about food waste throughout the country. And I just took a couple snapshots of some things that I thought were interesting to share with you all, but there's a lot more data on their website if you are curious about this subject. This here is the entire United States in 2023, and a fairly grim pie chart of where this food is going. So roughly, 65% of food produced in 2023 was consumed, and then the rest of it was surplus. And most of that surplus is waste, with that small little sliver being donations. So out of all of that food that could possibly have been salvaged or used by somebody, a lot of it's going to waste. And the next slide is Alaska specific, but this is the same year, 2023, 137,000 tons of food surplus in the state. And you can see that 80-90% of that is not being eaten by people. A lot of it's ending up in the landfill, and a lot of it that's not ending up in the landfill is going to compost. And then you can see the donations is just this small bottom center sliver. So we'd love to get more of that here and less of it going to the landfill. But how that can be done is pretty tricky, right? When we're already doing grocery rescue all the time, and we're bringing in hundreds of thousands of pounds of food a year in grocery rescue, and it's still a small fraction of what's surplus and what's being produced. And yeah, and then this is the same figures, but divided by types of food. And yeah, it would have been great to have like somebody in restaurateuring here, because a big chunk of this chart is prepared food. Not a huge percentage, but still a lot of it is, coming out of restaurants and things like that. And then produce is a huge chunk too. Produce is one of the things that's really hard for us to move because it just doesn't have a very long shelf life. I took in a whole, I don't know, close to, I think it was like 900 pounds of spinach today. And I had to refuse another probably 1,000 pounds because I don't have enough refrigerator space for it. And that's a shame, but I can't move it and I can't store it. And it's only going to be good for about a week, maybe. So produce, that's a really tricky one. But like things like dry goods that are, not necessarily getting donated, that's stuff that we can use. And frozen food, we have quite a bit of freezer space. stuff like that is great for us. Couple caveats is we can't necessarily take, like, here in Alaska, I get the question a lot. Do you take game? Do you take like salmon that I caught? And we can't accept any food that hasn't been commercially prepared or processed. So if you've still got some deer in your freezer from last year's hunt or something like that, I can't take that, unfortunately. But you know, a lot of fresh meat and seafood, if it's frozen, especially by its best by date, then we can keep it for quite a while. And that is one of the things that people really, really come to us for, is proteins. So yeah, anyway, I was going to include a slide here that said, like, here's some of the stuff you can do, but I didn't get around to it. But the big ones are, I want to just talk about the, you know, the USDA guidelines, and talk to people about donating and volunteering. So we are an organization that was for a long time completely volunteer led and volunteer driven. And only in the last decade or so did the food bank begin to staff employees. And now we are a team of 3. There's myself, our storefront program coordinator, and our driver warehouse lead. There's 3 of us, and we're all working very hard, but we're only doing a small fraction of the work that needs to be done here. I have a really amazing team of volunteers. I've got about 20 people on a regular rotation, and then I've got another 20 people that are on an on-call basis. And then when we have things like food drives, we get a whole bunch more people that come in and help us. But we're only one organization that's doing this work. There's a lot of other people out there that are looking for volunteers as well. So if you have time and you want to get involved in mitigating food waste or helping with food security in Southeast Alaska, you can call me, or you can call one of the many other organizations in Juneau that's doing this work, and there's lots of volunteer opportunities. Also, donations are huge. We'll take them. The Glory Hall will often take them. Salvation Army will take them. We try not to take non-food items unless it's toiletries. But if we do get some non-food items, we'll pass those along to our friends down at Salvation Army or at St. Vincent's. And a lot of that stuff really helps with food waste. A lot of those things, even if it's like not necessarily food itself, but something that can help somebody prepare food. A ton of the people that we serve are people that have limited or no access to kitchens and regular cooking supplies, and things like that can help. And then, of course, just being very conscientious and aware of the amount of food waste, even in our small community and in our state of a relatively low population and not a lot of food production. There's a lot of food being wasted, and the more people can be thoughtful about what they buy and what they use can really go a long way. And then lastly, there's so much plastic and paper waste that comes with our food. And a big percentage of the waste that I talked about that we generate is just packaging. Anything you can do in your own life and your own home to make sure that stuff gets recycled. You can compost a lot of paper products as long as they're not like glossy and printed. It's, you know, it's a small thing, but it does make a difference in the end of the day. Okay, that's all I have prepared, but I'm happy to hang out and talk more about any of these things.
That was fantastic, Dan. As I alluded to at the start, I was a little nervous that our other panelist was unable to come at the last minute. So I'm really glad that you reached out and touched some of those other things like USDA guidelines on how long this stuff lasts. And And there's an image that I've seen before that I kept thinking about during your presentation. So if I can steal
Yeah.
screen sharing for just 1 second. Um, so this is a figure. I think I first saw this on a presentation from Lisa with Juno Composts. And you kind of alluded to some of these priorities in yours, which is like
Yeah.
it's best if you just don't waste food. Um,
Mhm.
and that's another one of the topics that I was hoping, we could talk about as a group today. Would have been, planning for a big holiday meal. If it's just, you know, two couples getting together for Thanksgiving, do you really need a whole 20-pound turkey? Um, and so, I'm not an expert on that. I guess I'll just throw out Google as your friend. Feeding hungry people, this is you. You gave us a lot of great things to think about the best ways to do that. Feeding animals. I didn't even know we had any pig farmers in Juneau, so that was news to me. Um, Composting. This is something that JCOS talks about a lot because compost is valuable for people having their own home gardens. And if that stuff goes down to that bottom box of landfill, in the landfill, it'll be generating methane. And instead of producing this valuable garden supplement, it's just producing greenhouse gases and also filling up, land space, creating bad smells that waft all over Lemon Creek. Um, so I really like this food recovery hierarchy, and I think about it a lot. And then there's another disposal method that's not even on here. That's kind of a pet peeve of mine, which is I know in the past Juneau has had problems with some, you know, commercial entities putting a lot of food down the drain into our sewer system. And our wastewater treatment plant really can't handle that kind of overload of organics, especially when it's a lot of kind of fats, oils, and greases. Um, and so, if you're just putting tons and tons of food like through oh, why is my brain blanking on the word for something that chops food up really small so it can go down the drain? Um,
Disposal.
Disposal, thank you. It's been a day. But yeah, so like tons of food going down the garbage disposal. Not only does it have, none of the benefits of feeding animals or composting or whatever, but it can also actively harm city infrastructure. Um, so, I mean, you in your practice, clearly feeding hungry people is your number one mission, but then you've also started utilizing these other kind of intermediate steps of this hierarchy before going straight to throwing stuff in the landfill. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I didn't choose to go into food banking, but I just kind of fell into it. But if there was one real motivator for me, is I hate food waste. I like when I go to the grocery store myself, I buy like three or four things and I make sure I eat them, and that's it. I try to buy stuff that has little to no packaging. And for me, it's just kind of a personal vendetta against food waste, but it's something that I've tried to implement in my time here at the food bank is just try and eliminate waste wherever possible. And not only does it make me feel good, but it also just makes us be a more optimized organization. It really is kind of at the heart of what we do is try to eliminate food waste. And you know those are some of the ways to do it.
Yeah. So I have a question that you might not be able to answer because this isn't your job, but you're just more tapped into this community than I am.
Nick, I can barely hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Here, if I scoot in a little closer to my laptop, is that better?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. Um, I know it. So in a different community, a bigger city than Juneau, I used to volunteer um, at kind of the Glory Hall equivalent. A place that provided hot meals, and I know they took in donations from restaurants and cafeterias in the area. Like they had a partnership with a local university. Do you happen to know if the Glory Hall or anyone in town takes those prepared foods for like day of reuse?
Yeah, I won't claim to know a whole lot about it, but I know that the Glory Hall does do that. I'm not sure who they source it from, but yeah, a lot of those like prepared foods that we wouldn't be able to take, they do. You'd have to ask them for the details on it, and I don't know. Yeah, I can't speak to it really, but it is the case. Another thing I should mention, and I also don't know a ton about this, but some of the things that we get donated that we can't necessarily use, they will take. So certain things like seasonings, that's something that they're always asking me for. And we'll take them if they're new and they're sealed. But the Glory Hall will probably take a jar of lemon pepper that's half full, whereas we won't. And things like that. You know, if you've got like a half a bag of rice, they'll probably use it, whereas we won't. Um, so yeah, quite often we've got a donation box out front that people drop stuff in after hours. A lot of it's stuff that we can't really use, but if it's something that's like partially used, I would recommend that you call them first and ask them if they want it. But yeah, they in the past I know they've taken stuff like that, and they will take prepared foods too, as long as they're like meeting their food safety requirements.
Which entity is more likely to take a can of escargot?
Nobody will take it. Yeah, I don't know how relevant this is, but we are looking to expand into other regions of Southeast, and I guess I I could just touch on this a little bit if anybody's interested, but one thing that we come up against that's really tricky is like canned goods. The reason I'm thinking of this, something like escargot, whatever it may be, are heavy and bulky and they're hard to transport to other places, like for instance our members in cake. And so the only way that we can really get stuff like that to them consistently is if they can come and see us on the ferry, and that's, you know, intermittent at best. So one of the things that comes to mind when we're talking about like recommendations or what people can do is, if you have any sway over how the ferry runs, or if you have any insight into transporting goods between the small communities in Southeast, you know, we're all effectively living on islands here. And so one thing we'd really like to do is be a better hub for some of those communities. And, you know, this goes beyond food security and into other dimensions of infrastructure, of how Southeast functions as a community, a large community. The one thing that we really ought to be better about is using the resources that we have in the capital city to be able to reach our neighbors, and it's really tricky. So just a thought, but if anybody has any insight on that.
Diana, I think I can guess what your hand is about here. You're still muted if you were trying to talk, or was the hand raised an accident?
Nope, I was still muted. Thank you, Nick. Hi, Dan. I work for the city. I'm the environmental project specialist, and I work on a lot of solid waste stuff. I also work pretty closely with Plinkett and Haida, and I know that they've been doing a lot of, well, they just got a huge grant for Southeast tribal composting and recycling. So I think that, and they're about to tackle a lot of these same issues, right? Like I think the transportation logistical thing is the problem. for a lot of this stuff. So yeah, I'll shoot you an email, and if you'd like, I can connect you with some folks over there, and yeah, kind of have a
Okay.
conversation beyond that.
Yeah, Clinton and Haida is a member here, and
Cool.
they do visit us, but they're a big organization with a lot of people working on a lot of different things, and
Yeah,
so
they sure are.
I might
Yep.
not have the right contact, and I would appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll shoot you an email out tomorrow.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Does anyone else on the line have questions or things that you'd like to just talk about as a group? All right. Um, with that, Dan, thank you so much for coming in. Um, it's, I know it's a crazy time between Thanksgiving and Christmas and all the other stuff going on in town this week, but I learned a lot from your presentation. I see, some people in the chat chiming in that they appreciated it as well. So this was fantastic. Hopefully you and Diana talking about collaboration with Tlingit and Haida on getting, food, trash, recycling, all the things that our society moves around, getting to the right places in the right communities. Um, yeah, I appreciate your time, and I hope that everyone has good holidays with lots of good food that doesn't go to waste.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks very much for having me. I will just get a quick plug in before we go. The winter is the busiest time of the year for the food bank, and everybody knows that Thanksgiving is huge, Christmas is huge. People want to gather around food, around their loved ones, and celebrate the holidays. But we have a long winter in Alaska, and as utility bills raise and as money saved from summer jobs whittles away and so on and so forth, that's when people need the help the most. And so if you can, or if you have any pull, please keep us in mind, keep the Glory Hall in mind, keep St. Vincent in mind, and all the other many great organizations that we have in Juneau that are doing food security work or mental health work or housing security work. As the winter goes on, February and March are when things get really hard for people. So be looking forward and trying to help in whatever ways that you can as we face the darkness of winter. Yes, once again, thanks for having me. It's been a great pleasure. I really appreciate it.
All
Good
All
right.
night.
right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Dan.
You bet. My pleasure.